The 1969 Camaro, this was my first car, and they say that there's always something special about your first car that remains fondly in your brain. Let me describe how I acquired this car and what the options were on this 1969 Camaro. After graduating from high school, I landed a job at the BX on Webb Air Force Base. Shortly after working about a month, I saw this butternut yellow Camaro with a for sale sign in the windshield. I had absolutely no credit history and would require a co-signature no matter what car I would purchase later. I looked at a 1969 Boss Mustang and brought it home for my dad to look over. He didn't like what he saw and suggested that the Camaro would be a better buy. I ended up purchasing the Camaro from an active duty GI who wanted to trade out of this car for a Corvette. The 1969 Camaro had a 307 motor in it with a 2-barrel carburetor and produced 200 horsepower. It had to have. It had a sticker on the air cleaner that said it had 200 horsepower. This was a 3-speed automatic turbo-hydromatic 350 transmission with a column shift. This car had no air conditioning, but I didn't care. I had the wind. Aftermarket 3-gauge cluster for temperature, oil pressure, and voltage were mounted under the dash. The first thing that was customized was the wheels. I had Krager SS polished chrome wheels added during the first year of ownership. The car had 4 speakers for the AC Delco AM/FM radio that was standard, but I wanted to up the sound. I added 4 6x9 speakers to the rear dash and changed out the 2 speakers in the door, plus I self-installed a Pioneer AM/FM 8-track deck. What a sound it made, but boy, did I get looks at folks thinking I was over the top back in 1973. The car had about 40,000 miles when I purchased it, and the transmission failed at 55,000 miles. AMCO rebuilt the transmission, but trouble soon followed after the engine mounts failed. This was about a week later when the throttle would stick if you pushed the car. Then the rear main seal started leaking, minor originally, but continued to get worse until I sold the car with 95,000 miles on it. That car was traded in for a 1973 Camaro Rally Sport. The comparison between the first generation Camaro and the second generation Camaro is night and day. This car had more power. With the radio-tuned suspension, it just soaked up the bumps. Plus the car had air conditioning. I took this Camaro to Germany. I got stairs everywhere I went with the large front nose spoiler and large tail spoiler. I still remember this car to this day as being the best driving car I have driven until the 2019 Ford Mustang. This car just floated over the back roads of Germany. It cruised the Autobahn effortlessly. Before leaving Germany, the car was sold to a civilian that worked on the base for the exact price that I had paid for it. In preparation for college, I purchased this 1978 Ford Capri. Unlike the European cousin, this American spec car had the twin headlights and American safety glass. This was the first car that I have owned that had manual reclining seats and a very pleasant updated interior. Driving home from work one day, while it was raining outside, I turned on the left turning signal and saw an electrical spark in the dash. Once I got home, I checked the fuse box and noticed that the fuse that controls the turning signals was blown. The fuse was replaced, but every time I turned on the left turning signal thereafter, the fuse would blow. I checked the entire circuit for water and moisture and found none. The Capri was taken to the Ford dealership where it sat for over a month, with the Germans completely baffled by this electrical issue. The solution would be to replace the electrical harness, but now the car would no longer be within American specifications. The Ford dealer ended up splicing the harness to bypass the problem so that the turning signal would work. I didn't like what would happen, but in order to deal with this new problem, the car was sold and not shipped back to the States. The oil crunch was in full force in 1979 with long gas lines and difficult travel on Sundays. it was decided to purchase an economical car. The 1979 Chevy Monza turned out to be one of the worst cars I've ever owned. This car had no power to ascend hills of any size. Weighing close to 3,000 pounds and only 90 horsepower, it would take 13 and a half seconds to reach 0 to 60. That's an eternity in engine years. The first family trip to Arizona proved painful when the car had difficulties traveling uphill in the hill countries of Texas. Once we arrived in Arizona, the car was traded for a 1979 Honda Accord. Thank God. The dark days of the 80s is no joke. The worst of the worst American cars rolled off the assembly lines. The Pontiac J2000 was one of those cars. We purchased this car because the family size was growing, but oh my goodness, what a piece of junk. The transmission kept failing and the car was repurchased by GM under the Lemon laws. The next car I purchased, I had high hopes for. It was roomy, quiet, comfortable, and lots of power. The turbocharged 3.8-liter motor that produced 180 horsepower, but 270 pounds of torque. This, a 1981 Turbo Regal, would set you back in your seat when you mashed the pedal. But the real challenge would be its reliability. First long trip that I took was to San Diego, and while going uphill just before Yuma, I saw the generator light flash for just a second. I didn't think much about it since the light went out. We stopped for gas and the car would not start when we tried to continue on. Totally dead, no lights or anything. The car was towed to a local Buick dealer and it was found out that the fusible link was fried. Under the hood, I found one of the wires completely missing the outer insulation and metal-to-metal contact near the alternator. My dad was an Air Force jet mechanic, and he suggested that all the spark plug wires and other wires nearby be wrapped in Teflon spiral wrap to keep the turbocharger from burning up all the wires under the hood. This is something Air Force jets use. The temperature gauge was the largest I've ever seen, and it was large for a reason. That temperature gauge would rise 30 degrees after engaging the turbocharger within 30 seconds. Needless to say, this would continue to be a problem in the Arizona heat, and thus the car was sold in the summer of 1983. Some other vehicles I experienced in the 80s were a 1983 Berlinetta Camaro, a 1985 Monte Carlo, and a 1986 Chevy Astra van. All of them had various issues. The Monte Carlo was silver and the car was not painted properly, and the paint job started to rust off, and thus the entire car had to be repainted while under warranty, of course. The Astra van was not prepped properly at the dealership, and within 1 week the transmission failed due to no fluid. It was a whole host of problems in the 80s that just made you think that the American automobile industry was not ready for prime time. Various GM engines being switched around like an Oldsmobile engine in a Pontiac. Who knows, proof of something like that today might bring you big money at a Barrett-Jackson auction or a Mecum auction. The quality and styling of the 90s changed dramatically. I was financially able to afford what is referred to as a luxury car. I purchased a 1995 BMW 525 Series. This was the first car that I could drive for hours, exit the car, and not feel like I was vibrating down the road still. Very well built. The door would make a thump sound when closing and not that half clunk sound of an American car. The strangest thing, though, with this car was the seat backrest. One day while driving, I just couldn't get comfortable in the car seat no matter what I tried to do to adjust it. After stopping a couple hours at work, I returned to the car, got in, and noticed that the back seat rest was slightly turned away from me when I opened up the driver's door. I made a beeline for the BMW dealership to get the seat fixed. And it was a good thing, too, because by the time I arrived at the BMW dealership, the seat backrest was completely turned sideways. Turns out that this was a common problem, which is kind of strange when it comes to safety. The next luxury car was a 2003 Mercedes-Benz 350e. Great car for its looks, performance, and reliability. I was wanting something a little sportier from Mercedes when I noticed the Mercedes SL 500, a hardtop convertible with astonishing looks and a price to match. I waited to find a used one in 2005 since the initial cost of many of them was in excess of $100,000. I got a great price on one 2004 SL 500 with very low miles and plenty of remaining warranty. The one thing I found out about the SL 500 rather quickly was the high-tech nature of this automobile. It had a body-raising feature that used fluid hydraulics. This feature had a warning light that would come on almost every other day saying the car was too low to drive. The car spent many days at the Mercedes dealer trying to fix this problem. Unknown to me was also the tire problem with this car. In 2006, only Michelin and Dunlop made tires for this vehicle, and they were in short supply. We got a flat tire just outside Chattanooga, Tennessee, and there was only one tire left for this car, and it was located in Orlando, Florida. We put on the spare tire and limped into Washington, D.C. We were only partially to our destination in Maine, and the Mercedes dealer in Tyson's Corner was gracious enough to give us a rental vehicle until they could get the new tire on the car. After returning from vacation, it was found out that this was not an unusual problem at all. Many of the Mercedes cars were having tire problems. A woman visiting the DC area had a flat tire and ended up having her car shipped back to Idaho once the tire was found. Unbelievable that such a problem could exist. As good as this SL 500 was on the road, you would still get a backache after many hours of driving, but I thought that's what's expected. As I discussed earlier, I have owned quite a few cars, and I am in the perfect position to determine which features on a car work, which are troublesome, and where the auto industry has been and where it will be heading. The Ford Mustang Bullitt has all the features and quality that you could possibly want in a car with this price range. If you speak with owners of the Bullitt Mustang, they wouldn't change a thing. Not the color, not the exhaust, not the performance, not the stereo, not the wheels. All these things are commonly changed in the aftermarket world. The one feature that is most important is the driver's seat to me. Just nothing like it on the market today. I leave you today with the scrolling credits of the cars I've owned over the years. Some make no sense, but that's me, depending on my current lifestyle. Good day.